Lately, there's been a lot of discussion among family offices, as well as in the press, about this great asset shift that is going on. UBS puts the figure at 5.2 trillion. Bank of America puts it 129. Samy will explain how you can have 5.2 trillion, 129 trillion, and both sort of be right. And he'll fill you in that in a few minutes. While this program is entitled The Great Asset Shift to 2024, it's really something that's been playing out and is going to play out over a number of years. So it's not something that's going to be one big shift. One day the light switch is on, the next day it's off, and the next generation has the money, but this is going to be transferring over a period of time. And we're very fortunate to have Samy Dwek, who is the founder and CEO of the Family Office Doctor, and sitting next to his left is Michael Cabanas, who is with Fiduciary Trust. So we're gonna have a great conversation about really thinking about the practical side of this. You know, how do you handle all these issues? If you have a business generating several hundred millions of dollars, there's already conflict and infighting and things going on. Now you throw sibling rivalry in the middle of all that, and whew, baby, you got some real good stories. So we'll look forward to hearing a few of them. Look forward to talking about, you know, what if the offspring aren't exactly aligned with what the parents have envisioned for their legacies. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And we're going to get into a number of other issues. And this is supposed to be a conversation between our panel and our guest here. And then certainly it's aimed at the family office community. So I would invite people to, if you have a question, just put the hand up. I'll come running. I've got the mic here, so I'll bring it over to you. You can ask your question, and we'll get you on so the people online can hear you, because there's 200 people online as well. The only thing I ask is not to be like the Honorable Edward Everett. Anybody know who he was? He was the guy that spoke before Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address. He went for 2 hours, and nobody knows who he is today, right? So don't be like him. Be considerate our panel's time. Be considerate the other guests here, and try to be concise and get to the point of your question. If they need more context, they're very glad to ask it. So with that, I think maybe a couple introductions. I'll start with myself. My name is Heil. I'll be moderating this panel. I recently joined Pickwick Capital Partners as managing director. Pickwick is a FINRA registered advisor to middle market companies and alternative asset funds providing strategic and transactional services. But we deal in areas of defense, medical, fintech, green tech, and so on down the line. We provide a full range of investment banking and fund placement services. We work for public and private held companies, and of course, there's always a disclaimer. So I'll just put out a quick disclaimer here. Information presented up here is for informational purposes only, not to be relied upon as tax, legal, or investment or other advice. To the extent I express an opinion, it's my opinion, not that of Pickwick Capital Partners necessarily. So, and with that, Samy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm going to be very brief because I want to make sure we have enough time to cover everything. So if you need to know who I am, look me up. I'm on LinkedIn, look up my website. You can see who I am. I tell people I am a banker in recovery. I spent 26 years in finance for my sins. I grew up in England in a family business. My family coming out of the Middle East, we came as refugees to England and built a business from zero, quoted on the UK Stock Exchange. At age 16, I left home and said, I want nothing to do with this. There was too much infighting, not for me, and ended up in a bank, like all Jewish boys do, you know, so what can we do? So it was that or being a lawyer. And so I pivoted about 5 years ago, and one thing I recognized was a big need in the business community is everyone focuses on the legal side, trust and estate planning. They focus on the accounting side, and they focus on the money management side, but nobody focuses on the family dynamic side. So I have made my entire being around family dynamics because I lived them. And I worked with clients who dealt with them, and I've seen families feud and beat each other up at the table, and I mean physically jump over the table and beat each other up. So, you know, when I was talking with Mark and Michael, this was very important. I actually wrote about this probably 2.5 years ago. So this is not new. A generation lasts 25 years. We are 14 years into this generation. So that means we've got another 11 years left on the back end. And people have not been focused on the asset shift that is taking place. Now, when I wrote my paper, Cerulli Partners came out with a number of $79 trillion changing hands during this generational shift, which ends in 2035.
That's a lot closer to the 129 figure than the 5 trillion.
There we go. Bank of America recently updated that number to 129. Now UBS, who came out with their figure in a report earlier this year, you have to look at the numbers. So they came out with two very interesting numbers. Number one, from April of 22 till April of 2023, there were 53 billionaire families that transferred wealth from one generation to the other, and that was about $151 billion of assets that changed hands, right? In the number that they're talking, the $5.2 billion, I think it should be $1 trillion. It's 1,023 billionaires in the US aged over the age of 70. So they were very specific at the target number of people they're looking at. So when you look at this generational shift that we are in the midst of, it is a massive waterfall. And what is shocking is when you look at how many families have done trust and estate planning, yeah, great. How many have governance planning done? Who has spoken about what happens to the family business in the next generation? Which family members fit? Which family members should be part of it? Very little. In fact, Merrill Lynch, their Center for Wealth, for Single Family Offices, reviewed that there were 80% of single family offices that had unplanned discussions. Unplanned, it just kind of came up and they weren't good conversations. They weren't prepared. They didn't know how to deal with it. That's a massive, massive problem. And in my article, and you can find it on my website, it's precipice or opportunity. The reason I called it precipice or opportunity is because if you're looking after those single family offices, if you're the CFO, the CEO, you're the patriarch's person. You don't represent the next gen. You may service them, you don't represent them. Same goes for the T&E attorneys, same goes for the CPAs and the bankers. If you don't have discussions, relationships, you're not having ongoing relationship, when that change happens, you're gone. And we're seeing it, and I can give you countless stories of this happening.
Why don't we give
Yeah,
Michael a chance to
sorry.
introduce himself? You went straight into the program there, which was terrific. I knew you would, but that's all right.
No more. So you introduced me earlier. I work with Fiduciary Trust. We work with ultra high net worth families. I've been in your business for 25 years. We help clients with investment management, estate planning, tax planning, all that stuff is very important. You know, a lot of good lawyers in attendance and also in the community. So that's taking care of the technical part of this. There's a few of us here today, there's plenty of us here today. How many of you have family dynamic issues in your family?
And anyone who hasn't raised their hand is lying to themselves.
So families are messed up. When you throw millions of dollars into that, and usually that means mom or dad were working late nights and not around, so kind of the community helps raise these kids. Well, when these kids grow up, and money was not an issue, sometimes money kind of took care of the problems that come up and did not allow these kids, children to struggle when they were 15, and then when they were 20, and then when they were 30, 40, now they're 50 years old. And they were robbed of the opportunity to be able to learn life's lessons that we all have to learn. So how do you do that? And, you know, I don't wanna take Sammy's fire, because we've talked about this, you know, many times before, but it's communication. Communication is key. And I have a quote that I shared earlier. It's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So a lot of times we start working with families and there's these issues because no one really shared what happens or how it happens. And when there was a problem, there was an issue, no, we'll take care of it. We have a client who, his kid goes to a very, you know, high-end private school down here. And then we have, a friend who his son is there due to scholarship, but in the same school and they're buddies. And when the buddy who has to find work got a job at a commercial bank here locally, he told his friend, I want to do that, I want to go work. So he went, interviewed, didn't tell mom or dad anything, comes back home and says, hey, I got this job, Little Havana, it's great, can't wait to start. Mom and dad say, no, why are you gonna go do that? Like, you gotta drive halfway across town to get a job and you don't need to do that, focus on your studies right now. And this child ended up not being able to learn, get that job, the next job. Meanwhile, the buddy who was on scholarship did take that job. 2 years later got promoted, 4 years later got another promotion, 6 years later is making over $100,000 a year, and it's on his way to his career. So a lot of times, wealthy families and not allowing their kids to struggle or learn life's lessons is by far the biggest value that, a wealth management firm or a law firm or a CPA firm, just helping get the kids involved in life.
And I think this is so fascinating coming from Fiduciary Trust Company, right? Usually the thought process there is you do a deal, then you talk to them next time they have a deal or something that needs to be put together for the family. But I think there's some real opportunities being missed out there by the institutions, and partially the laws of the country have changed a little bit, making this a little bit easier to do. In some ways, privacy laws today make it more difficult to do this. And you certainly have, you're supposed to have that distance between you and your clients, right? And that's one of the things that's always being discussed, and then accounting firms are always getting fined for stepping over that fine line, right? So I think some of these things are in the minds of institutions that build that up, but you miss this opportunity to really provide background and advice and good advice to family offices. Sammy, you said something to say.
So actually, yeah, I want to go back on something Michael said. So, you asked the question, who's got a dysfunctional family? Okay. Yeah, and honestly, so I actually published an article this month on my website. All families by definition are dysfunctional, and dysfunction is healthy. It shouldn't be seen as a negative, but as a positive. Okay, when there isn't dysfunction, there must be some other underlying issue. And those issues are normally trauma, abuse, something bad has happened, that the kids will get together and look after each other. Because what is a natural phenomenon, and you can look at it in the Bible, by the way, I mean, you don't have to go that far, is that parents crave their parents' attention, kids crave their parents' attention. Right, so they are always like, well, my sister and my brother is the favorite and I'm not the favorite, and they get more and I get less, and I wanted to be treated equally. And I actually believe that's total baloney. You can't treat your kids the same, and you shouldn't treat your kids the same, because your kids are not the same. Your kids have different needs and different desires, and you can't treat them in the same way and give them the same things. So my son loves soccer. I'm not going to take my girls to a soccer game because my son loves it. I take my girls to what makes them interested. My child, one of them is an artist, so we go to art galleries. I'm treating them according to them, not according to each other, okay? And the kids need to also recognize, and this is through, again, communication, they don't have the same parents. I have 3 children with the same wife, but my kids have 3 totally different sets of parents. Because when my wife and I had our first child, we were very different people than we are today. We were different places in our life, in our careers, in our experiences. When child number 2 came along, we were different people. And so those different experiences and those things that had changed us made us act differently with child number 2 and then child number 3 yet again. So to think that you've got the same parents is a mistake that children make, and it is part of the cause of the issues in communication. So when you're dealing with this transition from generations, and generations are different. I remember my grandparents, God forbid you made noise in their house. We were there to be seen and not heard. My grandfather, God rest his soul, he was born in Damascus. We could go to the house, God forbid we made noise. My father wouldn't take me to a soccer game, my son I took to a soccer game, so there are generational differences that you've got to overlay on top of all of that. So getting people around the table, I think family meetings are the beginning of communication, right? The more families can be involved in their child's lives. It's funny, when we moved here, people thought we were weird because we have family dinners. My kids, their friends would go, what's wrong with you? You sit with your parents and have dinner. We each eat alone and do our own thing and whatever. It's like, no, we eat together. And it's that ability to communicate, right? Communication is the basis. Then you can work on the planning. And then you have to be honest with yourself, right? And I've had conversations with clients where I have to tell them, well, your son's really an idiot and you can't leave him the head of the business. My job is not to be nice, my job is to be fine, I tell them the truth.
And I think that's a great point that you have there. You heard Russell say it earlier this morning that if you met one family office, you met exactly one family office. We all know the saying, we've all heard it, but here it's really true. You're hearing Samy speak that right out. Cookie cutter solutions aren't gonna do it here. You need somebody to get involved with your family, need somebody who you can trust and not just trust with your finances, but trust that they're gonna help you think through the issues you as a family office have to think through. And I think that's where Samy and Michael are really of one mind and bring something different here. So, yeah, Michael, I particularly want to ask you, being you're a little more institutional than Samy, how do you bring that to your engagements? Maybe having a recent family that you started working with, how do you build up that trust? How do you start with them?
I think you just ask them questions. You try to bring in the kids in as early as possible. Some families are resistant, so you don't always have to share the balance sheet, share the numbers, but you could start by sharing family values. So Samy mentioned family meetings. There's many exercises we do, but one of them is asking, let's say, the youngest of the second group of kids, what's our family values? And have him or her say what they think. Then have the second one of the total poll, third, fourth, fifth. Then by the time the patriarch or matriarch comes and shares, it's their turn what the family values are. Usually it's, man, I already let you guys down. That's what you think we're here for? No, we're here to make a difference, make an impact, help people. But a lot of times that all gets lost because they're just so busy and they're just working really hard. Another thing, just to add on what we're saying, most of our clients, all of our clients, they're as happy as their least happiest child. So we really try to focus on everyone. And sometimes when they say, no, he can't come or she can't come, no, she has to come. Maybe I'll go visit with them first, understand where they are, know where we could start with this individual family member. But what I don't like is when they say, okay, let's tell daughter this, let's tell son that, and then have these 3 different meetings. That's okay, but what's gonna happen when mom or dad are not around?
Well, it's really important that you establish a trust with multi-generations, right? So
So
either one of you can comment on this. I'm not direct.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on what Michael said because I think it's really important. And I think all families need to start with a mission statement and a value statement. Who are we? Who are we? What do we represent? What do we stand for? What do we want the next gen to be representing? Like, what does our family stand for? Who are we? And there's a way to do this, and I find a lot of families do it the wrong way. So patriarch and matriarch will then decide, these are our family values, and this is who we are. And that maybe worked in my grandfather's generation, but in today's world, that ain't gonna fly. So what I try to do with families is we'll sit down as an entire family and have them discuss, what are their values? Now, kick the matriarch and patriarch out of the room and sit with the next 2 generations or generation and have that conversation, and then get the siblings apart, because brothers and sisters are scared that the other one's gonna go to mum and dad and throw them under the bus. So you have to have separate conversations to really get a true picture and then put it back together. You really got to be able to hear people, and people won't always speak when they're together, but they will speak when they're alone, when they don't feel there's a threat and they can be open. And you have to work with an interlocutor who's able to get involved and actually take that information, not throw them under the bus, and then thread it all together. And if you can get that value statement And I always use this as an example. I love Estee Lauder as a great example of this. So the brothers were completely diametrically opposed. They're just not the same people. And they sat down and they had a meeting on what kind of family are we? Are we family first or are we business first? So what's more important, the integrity of the brothers and their kids or the integrity of Estee Lauder as a business? And they took the decision that their integrity as a family being together, the two brothers with their kids and the next gen together was more important than the business. So they sold the business, they listed it and they got out. They cashed out, they have a seat on the board, but they keep the integrity of the business. You look at Roche and you see how they've done it to keep the integrity of the business. They put all the shares of the family into a blind pool with a trustee who votes the shares on behalf of the family. So you can't ever say one person did it, it's an independent, but the family has an out clause. If you want to go do your own thing, you have to sell back to the pool at a preset discount. And there is a whole protocol involved of how that works. And Maya Hoffman this year sold $1 billion worth of shares so she could buy artwork because that's her passion. And it did not disrupt her family and it did not disrupt her relationship with the family. And that is fantastic. And that's what it has to be
And
about.
that's a real talent, because I think one of the hardest jobs for a family is to assess their kids, right? One has the talent to really take over and really run the family office and continue it on. The other one, you know, went off and wanted to be a rock star, right? But now that dream is blown up and he wants to step back into the family business and start running it, even though he doesn't have his education. He hasn't spent the time in the business. And families now have to make tough choices and explain that to their kids. I ran into a family here today that was the exact scenario. He said, I joined this family to be the investment advisor, and I find myself spending a lot of time with the parents and the next gen because, you know, the one son, the older son, and the younger daughter. The daughter went off, got her MBA, spent all the time in the family business and family office, really understands everything that goes on. She doesn't want to run it, but she doesn't want her brother running it either because she realizes he's spent no time there and doesn't really understand it. And the potential issues that could represent when the money is transferred. So how do you handle that, Michael? How do you begin that conversation with them? I mean, and especially having that talent assessment, talking about their kids and what is, you know, very difficult for the parents.
So it's
And
a
again,
very,
it's a first gen family. So
yeah, first gen family, it's a very easy conversation, 50-50. If you got a master's, you were successful, you worked hard, why should you get only 20% because, oh, you don't need it? That is not the good foundation of a family office or family business. So what I recommend is have a board, have the children there, the parents on the board, the children on the board, maybe 1 or 2 advisors as well. And everybody has an equal right or vote. And that way it's not going to be emotional. It's more of a business setting where everybody shares their point of view. And at the end, professionally, you make decisions regarding, we're gonna invest in this, we're gonna sell this, one thing or the other, but it can't just be family. I think it's good when you have facilitators or third-party professionals there. That way it takes the emotions out of it and it's all about the business.
I'm going to push back a little bit.
Oh, this is when it gets fun.
I like to be problematic. So making family members equal because they're family members isn't necessarily the right answer. And the fact that someone went and got a good education doesn't mean that they're business capable or savvy. It means that they are very good in a school setting and can take exams. I do agree with the idea of professionalizing. I also believe in letting them earn their stripes and working their way through the company. I remember when I was 11 being taken to the factory floor and I had to carry rolls of plastic and load them onto trucks, and I was 11. And the rolls were probably bigger than me. And I had to work my way up in the family business, and you weren't just because you're family, therefore you're going to have a seat at the table. You had to earn your way to the seat at the table. And you should be given targets and goals that will determine how you get paid. And in successful families, what I've seen is that they are set goals. If you can increase this business line because this is your passion, let's say real estate, and you increase our bottom line by X%, you get X dollars bonus. You give them very specific targets, measurable targets, and reward. And if you can't, you're not gonna get paid, but you're part of the wealthy family, it's okay. There's the trust, and you can still get money from the trust, so your life is not gonna be that you're on the street, just means you'll maybe have a little bit less spending money than your sibling. Treating people equally, again, I'm not for treating equally because it may, and I saw, look, in Turkey, phenomenal family, very well known, brother and 3 sisters. The sisters were definitely smarter than the brother, but because they were girls, couldn't be head of the business, because in the Middle East, that doesn't fly. And so brother is the head of the business, even though sister was much smarter than him, okay? And that's the cultural element that kind of, got to look at that overlay too. But just because they're family members, should they be equal? I don't think so. I think one has to put in guardrails, one has to put in governance, and then one also has to think, I'm gonna throw another one in there, the in-laws. Okay, and the in-laws are really important, and people underestimate the power of the in-laws. Look at Cargill's. Cargill's is no longer owned by the Cargill families. 70% owned by the Macmillans, and the Macmillans are the in-laws from a generation and a half ago. They are now 70% of Cargill's. So don't underestimate the in-laws, and if you don't have governance in place and you don't have a kind of a game plan, it may not go the way you think. So it can't just be, oh, equal because they're siblings or whatever. But what I did like, I mean, you said a lot of good things, it's just that one bit. But again, I think the earlier you start planning, the earlier generational wise, the easier it is to deal with. But here's my other kind of word of warning is your planning shouldn't be the 10 Commandments. If it's chiseled in stone, you're gonna have more fights. It has to be able to adapt with the family and adapt with the views. And look, we've seen things culturally change across the globe, you know, the way people think. Henkel, big German family, they did well, right? Henkel had in their family constitution that gays could not be in the family business. Imagine trying to impose that today, you'd be hung. Things have to be flexible enough to change with the times as well. They can't be, you know, carved in stone.
So I want to help with, you know, what can we do? How can we fix this? How can we prepare the kids better? How many of you have children who are 16 years or older? Okay, how many of you have tried to teach them how to drive a car? How fun was that? It's the anxiety that it causes the person teaching. It's like, oh, the mailbox, oh, the trash can. It's like, so you hire someone to do that. As a parent, we see our kids differently. We have this anxious presence that we cause our kids to have. I know some professional athletes that their children also play sports. And I say, wow, your son must have this great advantage having you as a dad. He goes, no way. He listens to nothing I say. We can't even talk about this sport. So usually, well, successful families have this great network. They know lots of people. So how could this child learn from the village? You share these list of professionals. Who is your accountant, lawyer, landscaper, who washes your car, realtor, all these different people in your life who provide services. Doesn't mean you're gonna do that, but have them list everybody who knows what businesses they're in, and have the son or daughter write an email. Hello, Mr. Johnson. I am such and such son. I, would love to learn more about your business. Can I come and spend 3 hours with you one day? Who's gonna say no to that? And what they learn, they'll see, and then when they report back to mom or dad, oh, that's not my son, that's not my daughter, I didn't know that. So it really takes a village, and the benefit that successful families have, they have this amazing network that can instantly plug into this community of individuals who can help raise these children and teach them.
I know we have a number of families in our audience, probably some comments, thoughts, and things running through your minds. I want to give this opportunity right now for people to come on in and ask.
And one very quick thing, just the flip side to that, I believe let your kids fail. Don't use the network. Because your kids learn from failure, they don't learn from being helped by other people because you're part of a network. Let your kids fail. The best lesson they can ever get is falling on their face. When they learn to walk, you let them fall, right? Let them fall. It's okay. They'll get over it and they'll move on. And yeah, that to me is very important.
Failure is definitely part of life. You have to fail.
Great question.
I mentor poor little rich kids, because I say that there's a lot of problems being in the shadow of successful parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on and so forth. But being also a member of a family office that was sort of Gen 6 and 7, the family office was created in 1929, wealth was created in 1880, 1890, 150 beneficiaries in 4 continents. The problem within the family, because we're set up as a trust, not a capital management structure, is that we don't like outside advisors. We poo-poo paid for opinions. And so how do you overcome that? Because we benefit from we would benefit from outside advisors, but how do you overcome that apprehension, by successful people who say, I can figure it out by myself, I don't need advisors, and so on and so forth. So please.
Michael or?
Either one. Solve the problem.
Either one, yeah.
So like every good psychologist, you shouldn't come with the problems. You're not there to solve problems. The family's there to solve their own problems. So you start by learning, understanding individual interviews with different parts of the family, really find out. You create some time together to ask these questions for these issues that are that start to percolate. You start finding common problems, lack of trust, lack of communication, but you ask them questions, and like the magic question, the most important question, once you figure out these stumbling blocks, is you ask in front of 20 of them, 40 of them, 50 of them, 2 of them, like, what would it take? What would it take to move this forward? And you're gonna hear 50 different things, and then you start working through it, but have them communicate, have them share their pains, their hurts, their beliefs, their wrong or right perspectives. It's really important. You have to let them talk. The biggest issue is the communication piece and people not speaking. It's really hard to hate someone or not like someone when you're face to face. Now, if it's a conference call or it's via email, which a lot of times what your intention gets misunderstood because everyone comes in with preconceived notions. That's all they care about. That's all they want. So just get people speaking in a room face to face and ask these magic questions. The first one being, like, what would it take to sell the business? What would it take to buy another warehouse? What would it take to consolidate again?
Let me have a go at trying to answer your question. So, like you, I like mentoring other people, and I mentor a number of people who are from broken families and not of means. And it's an amazing thing to do. I put 4 kids through university by just being their mentor, which is not an advisor, right? And I try to tell people, advisors give advice, mentors help them hear their own voice. And that's the kind of role I like to play with families. Because sometimes common sense just isn't that bloody common. And I'll tell you something, well, I could have thought of that. That was obvious. And yes, but until I mention it, it's not obvious, which is why you didn't think about it until I mentioned it, okay? What I try to do with the families I work with is I open the kimono to what went wrong in my family business, okay? And what ultimately led to the collapse of the family business, which is, my father and one of my uncles sold to the middle brother, who was the feuding family, okay, delisted from the UK stock exchange, and then he imploded the business within a number of years. Now, my father and my uncle live in Monaco, so it's all great. Uncle, not so great, right? I opened the kimono. Let me share the pain we went through. Let me share our journey, and how can I help you not go through the same? Because it's very easy to get someone come in and tell people what to do, and a lot of people haven't sat in the same seat. And it's very easy when you don't sit in that seat and you don't have that experience to point fingers and say, well, textbooks say this. Yeah, but textbooks have nothing to do with reality. So I think opening up the kimono, and my wife's family, she's also third generation family business, and I can show you different dynamics and different dysfunction and different problems. Opening up the kimono and sharing the errors and what it can do to wealth, I actually think is what enables me to work with a lot of the families I work with.
I
Right?
think his question though is, he can't even get you in the room.
But that's what I'm saying. So it has to start at the higher generation and work and permeate its way down. The younger generation trying to push it up ain't gonna happen. The only time that the younger generation can really push something is when something bad has happened. Right? It's when there's a transition event and there's panic. But otherwise it has to come from the top. It's having that conversation with the top.
I want to hear from a family office that disagrees with something they set up here.
Please.
That looks at it and says, hey, my issue is, or our family, maybe you don't want to get too personal with your own personal issues, but you said something that just doesn't exactly agree with my experience. I'm putting her on the spot.
Or you could agree.
Yeah, good. That'd be nice.
She took a lot of notes.
So I work for a large family office in the Bay Area, and there's kind of an interesting family dynamic of, an ex-wife and an ex-partner, and that do not get along. So generally, I guess, in certain situations, how would you say it's best to, when do you know when to step in and when to not kind of step out and kind of just weather things out?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So it's, let's call it the creator, the patriarch,
Yes,
he's divorced.
he was divorced, and he passed away a few years ago.
Okay,
He actually left some investments, some co-investments with his ex-partner and ex-wife for, he wanted the family to kind of make up at some point.
ex-partner is, are we talking like partner as a business partner or
Oh,
partner as in
I'm
like,
sorry.
that's why I'm trying to understand what you mean by
Significant
partner.
other, I should say significant other.
Okay, so ex-wife and his significant other,
When he
and
passed
they,
away.
and they both have rights to the assets
Yes.
in a structure through a family office.
Yeah.
And there was no planning, there was nothing put in place to be able to liquidate or separate those two out.
No.
Okay, again, so you're in a very complicated predicament that you're in the family office having to manage the emotions, and family offices is all about managing emotions more than managing money,
Mhm.
right? If they're open to it, it's about bringing someone in to mediate between them and to be able to separate the assets into two pots. That's gonna be the best solution. And it's gonna be the best solution for them.
Yes.
And that's a matter of having conversations that they need to be open to.
Yeah,
Because you can only negotiate with people who are willing to listen,
yes, and that's exactly what we've been doing the last few years,
okay?
separating our assets.
Right, are they willing to listen? Are they listening?
I would say it actually has gotten better.
Okay.
Just not having so much interaction between the two and kind of playing mediator.
Mhm.
But yes, that's exactly what we've done.
Gotta be a mediator, not an advisor.
Yes, exactly.
Well, with that, Marty, we want to thank you for giving us this time. Sammy and Michael, you were everything that I promised you would be, and some. Great job.